it's a very great pleasure to welcome everybody here and to have a seminar at the RAI on matters Turkish. And I'm sure that we can arrange very freely in our debate and our questions as we come to them, because of course it's such a fascinating and quickly changing country. Now, Professor Rottmann is an academic at Özyeğin University in Istanbul, and this extraordinary rich monograph, as we will hear, has a beautiful concentrated picture of a second generation migrant to Germany, or rather from Germany back to Turkey. This is the kind of complexity that Susan will bring out in her talk. A quite remarkable piece of ethnographic writing, and I'm sure that we will learn a very great deal from her presentation. So I think that's quite enough for me, except to welcome Professor Rottmann to her seminar and to say the floor is yours. So please.
Thank you so much for those kind words, and thank you for hosting me. I'm really honored to present the book at this forum. I will talk a little bit about what I want to about the topic in a second. I just wanted to bring up the topic of the earthquake, which most of you probably know about. I guess I can say that it's really as big of a disaster as the media is making it sound. It's really, really a very serious, horrible disaster that will really take years to recover from. There's a huge loss of life. There's people who are homeless. There's other problems that are going to be emerging from this event. So it's something that right now we have more questions than answers in terms of preparedness, the response, and the rebuilding. I don't know if I can speak too much to those topics, but I'll be glad to talk with you about them in the Q&A or at any time. And they're definitely hanging over my head to some extent in this presentation, although the things that I'm presenting are not directly related. Obviously, this only happened one week ago, so I'm talking about research and work from before this time, but it definitely is sort of coloring a lot of things. So I just wanted to say one or two words about it. So to go to the topic of my presentation, I hope you can see my screen.
Looks good.
Okay, thank you. So I think we called the title In Pursuit of Belonging, Forging an Ethical Life in European-Turkish Spaces, which is the title of my book that I will be talking about. But I wanted to add and beyond and sort of talk about also things that I've been doing and thinking about since the book. And they're still related both to the methodologies I've used in the book as well as to the questions about belonging and migration that sort of interested me in the book. So I thought we can sort of open the discussion up beyond the book as well as talking about the book. The first half of the talk, I'll talk about the book. And in terms of going beyond, I wanted to talk about what I've been thinking about with Leyla's story after the book, and then my research with Syrian migrants in Turkey on belonging again, and how those are related to the book. And then at the end, I would love it if we could have a conversation about belonging. What does belonging mean in these uncertain times? Whether we're thinking about the pandemic, economic crisis, energy crisis, or earthquake. There's some kinds of questions there that I think are enduring. So the topic of the book is basically looking at these three questions. How does migration to Europe affect Turkish women's ethical values? So more specifically, does transnational movement result in liberation or reinforcement of some kinds of traditional norms of belonging? How does it affect their agency? And I'm even more interested now in the political and moral implications for feminists and others who are writing about Muslim women's agency and feminism. So this is the first topic related to gender. The second topic, how do people in Turkey reflect on the idea of belonging in Europe? So what do questions about Europe have to do with Turkey's identity, questions about Turkish culture, the future of Turkey, all of these kind of things that are often grouped together when people think about the Europe-Turkey relationship. And then how can we study migration from a broader perspective? So migration is a really important social process that we often want to understand it in its own right. But migration is also a part of people's lives, and people still continue their lives. They have certain goals before migration, they're affected by migration, they continue after migration, they change after migration. So how can we think of migrant identity as something that is fluid and changing and developing, both affected by migration and by the other things that people go through in life? So in the book is a classic ethnography in one sense. I think it has the sort of traditional topics of anthropology, which are the chapters are about work. Specifically, my main narrator works in a German-Turkish call center, motherhood, gender or marriage, neighborliness, and then religion. But I sort of try to tell this story. It's based upon observations and interviews with many people, but I tell it through the story of one person, a German-Turkish returned migrant named Leyla. And in the book, I also have included her own short memoir, which is 14 pages of her words, talking about many of the same things that I talk about in the book from her own perspective. And then I've sometimes included her reflections as I am also saying things about her experiences. So the main sort of conceptual framework that I'm looking at in the book has to do with ethics, or the anthropology of ethics. So for anthropologists, we're very interested in ethics as an action, as sort of efforts that people undertake to be a good person or to do the right thing, and how this is affected by the community or the context, the cultural context in which they are interacting. And I was very interested in how this relates to belonging. So especially for migrants who might have more than one community of belonging and a different variety of experiences, how do they understand what it is to be good or doing the proper things within their framework of understanding that? So I kind of look at three key ethical projects. These are definitely not the only ethical projects. These are just some ones that seemed key to me for Leyla. So first, her interest in education. So education, both in the sense of her own self-improvement, so wanting to read, wanting to be a person who has cultivated herself. She also often stressed her desire to be a source of proper information in her community, to educate others, and definitely to educate her children. So she would say that she even said her biggest accomplishment in life is raising her children, and her plan for her children to continue their education as far as possible. She also would say things like, I read, I teach my kids, I tell other people what to do, I know what I'm talking about. Those types of ways of thinking about what she should be doing or how she's doing things. In terms of gender, Leyla is dealing with a lot of things that could be a source of shame. She also has experiences of violence, incest. She has a disabled daughter. So she has to understand how to respond to these things, how to evaluate them, how to interact with others, and what does it mean to be honorable as a working woman or as a mother? What does it mean to be respected in your community as a wife or again as a mother? What does it mean to be caring, to be loving? So she has to kind of negotiate norms that are possibly differently valued in Germany and Turkey, but also there are different values also within Turkey. And so how does she sort of navigate what it means to be a good mother and to sort of overcome some difficult experiences for her? And then in terms of Islam, how does she understand what it means to have a respectable Muslim life? So this can be whether she decides to wear a headscarf, which she does or doesn't do at different times, whether she decides to be part of a religious group, how she educates herself, whether she reads the Quran in Arabic or Turkish, and what those different things mean. So she spends a lot of time talking about and thinking about what does it mean to be a Muslim, and how does her experience in Germany influence the ideas that she has about Islam, or the way that she performs it later in life. So I'm looking at these different ethical projects, and some of the things that I really want to bring out about them is that they are there's a lot of change and contradictions. So it's not just one project, it's not just one idea, it's a lot of reflection, questioning, contradiction, sometimes making one decision, sometimes making another decision. And this is somehow related to how she's trying to find belonging in different communities. But in brief, what I come to in the book is that education is a kind of encompassing project in Germany and Turkey. In a sense, the idea of being educated is a sort of, in a way, shared value, even if it has some different meanings. So they're talking about education, promoting education, thinking about how one becomes educated through migration or through time in Germany, is a kind of, I think of it as like an encompassing value. Within the realm of gender, I think there's a lot of contradictions. So these ideas about honor, rights, respect, equality, duty, care, these can all have different meanings in different contexts within Germany, within Turkey, between the two. So I think this is an area where she has more conflicting understandings, and where she has to make more difficult choices to understand how to find belonging, or where she wants to find belonging as well. In terms of religiosity, this is something that I think is a lot more changing than it sometimes is given credit for in research. So her story really shows how a person can go through different life experiences, have a lot of different religious experiences. And these are partly affected by her growing up in Germany and her access to Islamic education there, or lack of access, and then what happens to her when she comes back and she loses a daughter, and this pushes her in one direction, and she has certain experiences interacting with schools, and it pushes her in other directions. So here I just wanted to argue that it's something that is evolving for her. It's a very changing ethical project through life, and the places of Germany and Turkey matter, but they're not the only things, or they're not even necessarily the main things that matter. There are some shared ideas of in Germany and Turkey, and there are some different ideas about how people can be ethical. So when I think about her agency, or women's agency in the migration context, I think we should think about it in the sense that women want to uphold some community values while also meeting needs for autonomy, fulfillment, respect, and esteem. So therefore, migration is neither liberating nor reinforcing of pre-existing values. It's both. It's neither. It's depending on this specific topic and situation. And she and people who are migrants can potentially draw on awareness of more than one life world, in her case, German and Turkish, to act in novel ways. And I just want to share a quote from her talking about how she feels she lived her life. No matter what life has brought me, I try to see the glass as half full. We are human and we are flawed. No matter what, we will keep making mistakes. I try not to hurt others. And from now on, I'm not going to let other people hurt me either. I will strive to lead a peaceful and fulfilling life, with my husband and children, despite the bleeding wounds within my soul. I succeeded. So I think this shows her understanding of what she has achieved, even if in many ways her projects are the project of an everyday of a person's living their life the best way that they can with limited resources, with certain challenges and difficulties. I think migration is, as I've said, we shouldn't think of it as the necessarily the number one thing that is always affecting a person, or causing them to act in different ways. But I think we can think of migration as something that expands choices. So other people have written about this as a double consciousness, a plurality of vision. They're writing in different contexts, to be clear, not necessarily about migration, either writing about exiles or writing about subordinated or colonized groups. But people have recently started to write about this with migration in terms of bringing a new landscape of meaning, a wider set of experiences from which to draw inspiration. So I think that's kind of how I think about it. And that's something that I want to come back to and explore more for other migrant groups, or I'd love to hear from other people if you've had this thought about your own research with migrants. Turning to the question of Turkey's belonging in Europe. So first, I was interested in how German Turks have this role in Turkey, and maybe even more so at the time of my research, the time of this research a few years ago, of kind of symbolizing, Turkey's potential belonging in Europe, and how they have been integrated or not integrated, and how they come to symbolize the kind of debate about Turkey's belonging in Europe. And at the time that I was writing, we can talk about what the situation is like now. There was this idea that Turkey is turning away from Europe. Ottoman history is becoming more important. Turkey will be a leader in the Middle East. No longer should we think of Turkey, Turkey's Europeanness is not so much a question anymore. So I really felt during the research that it still was an important debate, politically and socially. People talk about German Turks in a way as how they represent Turks' Europeanness and what that represents for Turkish identity, as well as German Turks talking about what it means to see Europe. And I think we can say that to some extent the identity concerns of Turkey in relation to Europe are now superseded by economic concerns and an earthquake and all these other things that have happened, but still it remains a kind of question, a kind of place that people look to understand themselves. And in an environment where Turkey is just getting more and more polarized and having more and more heated debates, this question of where is Europe in Turkey's identity or in Turkey's relationship is still really important. Yeah. And then for the last topic of the book, I just wanted to say, I just think that, as I've kind of already said before, we should focus on transnational embedding or field. So how people, I can see that Leyla at different moments, she grows up in Germany, she returns to Turkey, but her husband becomes a truck driver in Europe. She works for a German-Turkish call center. Her sister still lives in Germany. Like, she has a kind of ongoing connections. And so her transnationalism is something that she experiences differently, and that changes at different times. So it's not just that she has to have a particular action in another country to be considered having a transnational tie. I think the study of return migrants is really rich and something we should spend more time studying. I think it allows us to see some things about how migration does fit into their lives, what integration means, and maybe even something specific about women's agency in these processes, and how ideas shift over time. I definitely think that we could even have more research on return migration. Methodologically, that's the part that I want to bring up next. I think that it was really important to do long-term research. So as I said, I did interviews and observations with many German Turks, even though I focused on her. So the typical anthropological method of long-term research, but I also knew her very well. So being able to know somebody very deeply allows you to see maybe the changes and contradictions and how things emerge over time. Also, I really enjoyed the method of collaborative life writing. So writing my ethnography and then including her memoir. So understanding how she wrote about things such as her marriage, and then how I would try to understand what her marriage meant to her, using life story methodology, I think is a really rich way to deal with sort of large scale issues, but look at how they affect people's lives. So an actual person's, ups and downs and different changes that happen through their life. So in the book, I'm kind of looking at how migration creates ethical options, opportunities for belonging, and challenges for belonging. So what happened after the book? I think the difficult thing about doing a life story is that somebody's life continues after the book, so it's very hard to finish it. But that's not the only problem. That's not the only challenge. The challenge is that my relationship with Leyla continues, and it's very important to me. And I've kind of wanted to know what I should do next to continue our collaboration, or how can I continue our collaboration? So she expressed to me that she wanted to publish a full-length memoir. So in my book, she has a short version of 14 pages, and I've used a pseudonym for her for a variety of reasons, but she wants to now publish her own memoir under her own name in Turkish as a popular book, or nonfiction autobiography, I guess. So I said I would help her, and I want to help her because I feel like she was a big part of my book, and this is something I can easily sort of give back. But one problem that came to light is when she sent me the memoir, it was only 36 pages, so it's more of a short story. And I shared it with a colleague who made this comment: "It's an easy read with lots of action. However, the quality of writing is poor. I'm not only talking about typos and misused words, but the style of writing is cheesy. Sorry for being blunt." So she sort of pointed out that Leyla maybe doesn't have the training, or, and not only that, but I also don't have the necessarily knowledge of how to help her to publish her memoir. And it might seem like I don't have an obligation necessarily to help her or to do this thing that I don't necessarily know how to do or have the training to do myself. But I think it's raised for me some questions. If you form a friendship with people and invite them into a kind of collaboration, what kind of reciprocity do you owe to them? And how do we navigate the ethical obligations of friendship in anthropology, and then also in relation to the things that are happening in our culture and the way capitalism makes certain things have values in specific ways? And so within these questions, I'm kind of interested in how collaboration is seen as something really good within ethnography, and it was really good for me. I think it allowed me to go deeper, to explore things that I couldn't have explored if she hadn't also written her memoir, if she hadn't also wanted to work with me on my book. But my question is, what about co-authorship? Where is that in anthropology? Participatory action research, so the way that we bring those that we do research with into our work, for people like Leyla, or for people who, aren't academics and don't have certain other shared goals with us. How do we do co-authoring and action with them? And I also just think that we really need to think more about friendship in anthropology. This is something I'd love to talk about more if anyone has any thoughts about this, but I think it's a really understudied area. There's a few good works about it, but it's usually subsumed into kinship or in people's involvement in like civic or religious organizations, but not actually their social ties and what friendship does for people and what kinds of ethical obligations that it creates. So I thought I could just talk briefly about some of these questions that I've had since since the book and thinking about future work with Leyla. So I feel that she collaborated easily with me, but it's difficult for me to collaborate with her. So she helped me with my work because as an anthropologist, I'm trained in how to translate her, but I can't help her to translate herself or to fully become what Lassiter calls a co-intellectual. So for example, in her longer memoir, she writes about financial troubles. There were other troubles. We used to fight often. He was not the type to beat a woman. She's talking about her husband, but he was very irritable and grumpy. In a sense, he used to beat me with his tongue. There were times when he was unemployed. We used to have to buy food on credit from the market. We couldn't pay our debts. I couldn't work either. We had 3 children. So from this passage, I can make some conclusions about marriage, gender, and social class, and sort of explain this for readers in other countries or places or contexts, just sort of how women understand their roles, how they, why she might, what irritable and grumpy might mean, what beating someone with their tongue might mean. And I find a kind of power in how she says, that some kinds of short sentences, or, we couldn't pay our debts. I couldn't work either. We had 3 children. But I also don't know how this sounds to a Turkish native speaking audience in terms of whether it has the same power. How does it communicate some kinds of emotional truths? So I think it's hard for me to understand how I can help her to explain herself to her own community, or to any other community besides the one that I know how to communicate to. And in terms of participatory action research, she's not necessarily looking for action in her community in the same way that a lot of the targets of participatory action research are people who are want to make social change as activists, or people who are highly educated scientists, or people who are also, sometimes pursuing an academic degree at the same time. So it's hard to figure out how we can make our goals align in that way, even if we were to design a participatory action project in the first place. In terms of friendship, I strongly believe that she and I are truly friends. And this was something that I kind of thought about in the book, how she appreciated visiting museums and discussing things with me and how significant they were for her. She would often contrast them with conversations she had with other people, with her neighbors. But I kind of wondered, what, is it, what does our friendship mean to her, as well as what does it mean to me? So I have lived in Turkey now for 14 years and have had several different kinds of friends, and can understand something about different words for friendship in Turkish. So dost maybe means something more like close friend. Arkadaş is kind of a more general term for friend. Spiritual sister is what she called me, which is sounds like a very strong friendship. But again, I think what I'm lacking is some kind of intensive work on friendship in Turkey to even know what she might mean in the context of using these terms and what her expectations are. So I don't really understand or know for sure what are my obligations to her. What does she expect? To what extent is our friendship the result of her background in Germany, of the fact that I'm an American, of things that we have in common? To what extent does she really know me? Do I really know her? I don't think that we have the risk that some people have talked about, that anthropologists make sort of fake friends and then the people are hurt when the anthropologist leaves. I don't think that we have this kind of false intimacy. So I'm not worried about the risk to her from that as much as just because she might not be hurt by me doesn't mean that I don't still have ethical obligations for her, so towards her. So I guess that's what I am still sort of wondering about. So once you do ethnography with someone and develop a friendship with them, what do you owe them afterwards? What do you expect and what do they expect? When I've presented about the book in the past, people have asked me, aren't you worried that you revealed things about her that she might not have wanted to reveal, or that she wouldn't know what you had, wouldn't have wanted you to say what you said, or how you interpreted things? And I think that these are very valid questions, and these are ones that anthropologists have written and thought a lot about, and they are really important. In the case of Leyla, I'm a little bit, I think it's a concern. It can't not be a concern, but I feel with a lot of open conversations and, checking in, you can kind of come to a way of understanding what people, close to understanding what people would be comfortable with. I can also say that she's very open about expressing difficult or painful things. So in her longer ethnography, or in her longer memoir, she wrote about an experience. She wrote about actually feeling suicidal. Inside, my blood was crying. I wanted to forget the past, but everyone was looking at me with pity in their eyes. While I was in Germany, I tried to commit suicide twice, but failed. An old aunt, a neighbor upstairs, saved me. I was wondering if I should try it in Turkey too. It was good for me to attend a typing course. I was happy when I met new people. So she kind of started this typing course that kind of gave her some, maybe pushed her away from that. But she's not shy about talking about very, painful and personal things in her memoir, either the short or the long one. So I'm not so much concerned about what I reveal, as much as just how I have a kind of obligation through the stories that we have shared. So we have a kind of intersubjective being together that is fostered by sharing stories and life rhythms. And it's one thing for it's hard to know what should happen when that just ends. You know, that for me, that the ethical question comes there. So how do we maintain the friendship that came through ethnography? So I don't necessarily have the answers to these questions, but there are people who are writing about a way of kind of making an anti-colonial friendship. So it's looking at the way ethnographers can be caught up in webs of friendship and how they can be taught to be a friend. Their work as storytellers and listeners can build relationships even as they themselves are taught how to build them. So some kind of way that we need to maybe think more about what friendship is for anthropologists. This is a difficult context because we have a lot of pressures as university professors. We have a lot of pressures in capitalism to be productive, to meet certain deadlines, to write in certain ways. So collaborative projects in general, I think, have important barriers against them, much less a project where the academic would get maybe little credit or appreciation from it. So I think we need to just keep asking this question, how can we write ethical stories when the relationships which bring them to light are fraught and contradictory? And I talk about this, if anyone is interested in this topic, I can share this article that I'm writing about these questions for an upcoming collection about anthropologists reading migrants' writings. So that's what's been happening with Leyla, and my questions after the book have been a lot about where do we go with our relationship and where does anthropology go with these questions about collaboration and friendship. The other question that the book has made me want to ask is about belonging and research with migrants and to some extent ethics. So if I argue in the book, migration creates opportunities for cultural reflections and creativity surrounding belonging, would we say that that will hold true also with different migration trajectories, social positions, and political historical context? So there's German-Turkish return migrants. Sorry, I didn't really go into the history of German-Turkish return migration. I kind of assumed that this audience is aware of that. They were labor migrants after World War II, and then there have been different waves of migrants going to Germany and then returning from Germany. But to what extent are my findings in the books relevant to other migrant groups or other cases? And preliminarily, I want to argue that they are. So I started to do research with Syrian migrants in Turkey, and I found some things that definitely seem to carry over. So in a context of migration, an experience of a lack of belonging or a need to establish belonging can definitely create opportunities to find new belongings, and those belongings can be sort of hybrid or you know, novel, unique ways of understanding your place in social space, but there can still be a lot of conflicts and failures. So I think this is still important insight, and I am going to be continuing to explore this with migrants. So I thought I could just talk briefly about this research with Syrian migrants in Turkey. So there's 3.6 million migrants who have been fleeing the civil war, and they have temporary protection status, which is technically they are not refugees, but they are allowed to stay in Turkey for an unlimited period, although they face different pressures potentially to return. And I studied Syrian migrants as part of this EU grant called Respond, Multi-Level Governance of Migration in Europe and Beyond. And we did research in Istanbul, Şanlıurfa, and Izmir. And so I wanted to just talk about the the ethical projects that I talked about for Leyla, I'm not really sure about education. That's the one I don't know. I want to think about that a little bit more before saying anything about whether there would be a similarity in sort of ideas about education for German Turks or German as Turkish migrants to Germany and return migrants and Syrian migrants to Turkey. But if I think about gender, I think there are some similarities in terms of values of what it means to belong in a family, in a community, for women in particular. And one of the things that I've been interested in for Syrian migrants is cooking, homemaking, managing family resources, neighborliness, all of these kinds of relationships. So I'm sort of using food as a way to understand women's ethical values and belongings. And Islam, I think, is a really rich one that I am only just starting to sort of look at, but I thought I could just maybe talk about the gender, food and belonging aspect. You know, we have definitely found through our various research projects that women spend a lot of time cooking unusual foods that are difficult to get the ingredients for, that even though there are many similarities between Syrian and Turkish foods, in some cases, they spend a lot of time cooking things that are unusual, that are challenging to find. And so one question, I mean, this is something that, you know, it's almost in a way so obvious that it could be overlooked, but I kind of want to argue that it's a really important way that women provide for their families, that they provide for their children, and that they show care and love. This is a quote from a Syrian woman. "If I know that my daughter's birthday is in 2 months, I start buying ingredients for a birthday cake weeks before. 1 week, I'd save up 10 liras and buy ice cream, buy cream, and then some flour and candles so she can have her birthday party, something to make her happy." So it's not just one act, it's a series of acts, and it's about saving money, shopping at the right places, getting the things, putting it together, planning it. They spend a lot of time doing such things. And it's something that for some is not easy. So one woman talked about sometimes we buy some food for the children, some milk, and we take them to the park. We will sit a little bit, children will play a little, and we will go back home. That's our life. And that's why I'm telling you, I'm dead inside. I have no life. So this is a really sad example of how she related that in Syria, they used to go to parks a lot, and they would buy ice cream and food, and it was a very, you know, pleasant, fun pastime. But in Turkey, they have very limited finances. They can only buy some milk for the children and stay a short time. So not being able to provide those food, but just in general, those kind of like happy family memories is a big source of difficulty and sadness for some migrants. In terms of this idea of expanded choices that I talked about with Leyla, you can definitely see all sorts of examples in the food realm. So whether one topic that's come up a lot is whether they buy Turkish bread or Syrian bread, or for the children at school, someone related that their child said that they only want to bring Turkish bread because the other kids at school are making them feel bad for having Syrian bread. And then some women are talking about how they're cooking Turkish baked goods, but everything else they're cooking is Syrian. So we could look at how people are making choices about which foods to cook when and which context to try new foods, or to incorporate new and old together as a way of kind of showing their care, their love, their family provisioning in that way. And they're definitely very concerned with belonging. So they talk a lot about the importance of meeting their neighbors, cooking together, feeding kids together, as something that gives them really strong feelings of belonging. But also it can be a source of challenges and not so good feelings. So one person related about a neighbor who gave food, and when she saw the food that was given, she said, "I was shocked because it should be thrown out. It was not edible. After that, I cooked delicious foods and sent her dishes of it just to tell her that we are not poor people eating bad food. We are humans too and can cook and eat good food." So we don't know what the exact experience was or what was meant by it, but just the way food can be a language between the two groups, especially for women, a way that they show their agency, their skill, their ability, is something that I'm interested in looking at more. We could also look at the question of transnational Arab-Turkish space, as I kind of looked at the question of Turkey's belonging in Europe. I think this is, in this case, I hope there's no question that this is quite a lively debate in Turkey. Syria was a colony of the Ottoman Empire, and Turkey has always had porous borders with Syria and Iraq, and Syrians say that they chose Istanbul because it was a big city with Islamic rituals, a capital city. It has an Islamic spiritual side. It's part of our spiritual identity. It was ruled by Ottomans. It gives you an Islamic and Oriental spirit more than other cities. So many Syrians wanted to come to Istanbul, to Turkey. And although they were initially welcomed and still are welcomed by some, there has definitely increasingly been a call for Syrians to return to Syria, and that they claims that they are a burden on society. So there's, just as there's a debate about Turkey's belonging in Europe, there's also a debate about the extent to which Turkey belongs in the Middle East, or and how Turks relate to Arabs or to Arab countries. So that's something that affects this kind of ethical belonging conundrum for Syrians. So I am happy to talk about the topic of Syrians belonging in Turkey, as well as Leyla's experiences and the issue of German Turks, Europe, Middle East. There's a lot of things to discuss more. I thought as a conclusion, I could just raise the question of belonging. So I just maybe want to say that belonging has become a kind of something that's I'm personally very interested in. I think that it's something that I've been teaching about. I'm an American who's lived in Turkey for 14 years. And I've understood people who have moved out of Turkey and back to Turkey, and other people who moved into Turkey. What do I share with Syrians? What do I share with Americans who live in other countries, Americans in Turkey? All sorts of different questions about belonging to me are personal, but also intellectual questions. And I wonder to what extent we all are thinking about belonging these days in these kinds of uncertain times of economic, political volatility, polarization, and what is the idea, the broader relevance of an idea that certain kinds of upheaval, not only from migration, but like I said, this other kinds of vulnerability leads to particular types of opportunities. So perhaps by looking at the experience of migrants, we can understand more about the opportunities and challenges that we might face when we confront sort of different contexts. So I would argue that the study of migration and belonging is relevant beyond just the academy and even beyond the experience of migration itself. So the struggle to find a place of belonging is a key challenge for us all in these socially distressed times. So it's important to think about it and to discuss it more. So that's the end of my presentation. But I really look forward to discussing more with you if you have any questions or comments. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed. That was absolutely fascinating, and of course raised issues that I think all of us can empathize with. Is my screen frozen, or can you hear me? Because half of me is frozen.
I can hear you.
You can hear me. Well, that's good. In that case, we'll ignore the other half then. Yeah, it raised issues that all of us can empathize with in our own research, and in the complex relationships that we set up with the people who are kind enough to tolerate us when we want to learn more about them. Now, I'm sure there'll be many questions, but just for the sake of clarification, could I just, you see, clearly it's difficult for many people when they go to Germany, but also it's not difficult for some. So I think my question would be, why Leyla found it so extraordinarily difficult to negotiate a more stable life for herself in Germany. Obviously, I assume she wanted it. I see that she had bad luck in reaching that point, which put enormous stress on her. But would you like to enlarge in a little bit on how it didn't quite fall into place for her in a way that it does for some people?
Yeah, that's a very good point, in the sense that people's I would say in her case it was a lot her background and certain familial pressures that she had, and certain situations she had, you know, difficulties with her father. He was not a good provider and also violent, and then there were pressures from her family to send her back, or for her to be sent back, because he had taken her to Germany. So there was some kinds of ways that I think in her case, migration put pressure on the family that then prevented her from prevented the family maybe from adapting in a way that she could have stayed, so I guess it's a combination of factors that come into making what a person would be able to like how a person is able to grow or not in a particular context. So it could be, I guess, the specific characteristics like social class, or education, or location, or the sort of teachers and schools that they confront in the new context. But it could also just be some specific things about their trajectory, and I think that there are different trajectories. So I don't posit, or I wouldn't want to posit that all migrants become like Leyla, or that they have all returned, or that, you know, she represents all return migrants. So there's a lot of specificity to her experience, for sure. It's just certain things, I think, that maybe are sort of could be struggles that maybe go across.
Yeah. I mean, this is what comes out so beautifully from your account, is the emotional cost of life, really. Actually, as you rightly say, it's not only migration, which is incredibly high. But maybe I missed that bit of the book, but I'm thinking in terms of her own work, was she not able to move from something that upset her in the illegal sector to something that was legal? I do apologize if I missed that, but this is the crucial point that so many migrants do. They start by working anywhere they can find, but they all want to move, well, all, I say all, but the common narrative is that they move from a job which isn't quite legal to one that is in fact legal. And then if they're lucky, they can keep it for a while and one thing flows from another. So I'm thinking about that transition between an illegal job to a legal job. Did she talk about that with you?
Yeah, and actually I, for a while, thought that I could help, again, thinking that I could help her in some way to go, because she actually, she at one point, I made a CV for her. I showed her how to use email. She didn't have a high school diploma, and she didn't have some kinds of basic, computer or workplace skills that you kind of need today. So I kind of worked with her, and she actually got a job interview with Siemens, which would have been great, as a legitimate call center worker or legal. But she couldn't get through the interview. And I think it's like lacking the kind of skills of knowing how to talk or knowing how to, like, a kind of again, like a cultural capital. But in her case, that wasn't the only thing. There was also, it was hard at different points. She had to go back to caring for her daughter, or her husband didn't want her to work at different points. There was some kinds of different pressures on her. So it was a little bit her kind of social context that I think maybe prevented her from struggling as much as she would need to eventually to do it. If she had been like a single woman with the right, I don't know, supports, it might have been possible.
Yeah, that's terribly convincing. That so many of these narratives involve the family encouraging people to move to something which is a bit more stable. I'm sure we can come back to these issues, but we have several colleagues who've asked a question. I think there are 3 questions here, I'm sure we can answer them all. Giovanna, it's very, very nice to see you, hear you. Would you like to ask your question live? So if Annie, if you could highlight Giovanna, I'm sure that it would be very good to hear from her.
Yeah, so Giovanna, if you want to speak, you would need to use the raise hand function, which is under the reactions. Oh yeah, there you are. Okay, you should be able to unmute yourself now. I think we can hear you.
I think your collaborative work is very interesting. And I'm sure that your work can be a starting point, a very interesting starting point for a public work about narrative with writing experiences and stories, a story with Leyla, if she wants to continue working with you, because I think that this collaborative work can be very useful to open another step of your work. That means to do public anthropology, and I had a similar experience of your experience in Turkey with Turkish and German second generation girl, and but my experience was in Muslim countries, starting from in Saudi Arabia, and it was not only in Saudi Arabia for some years, but also in other, maybe other 10 countries, but in 10 Muslim countries. But these countries were described and told with the stories by 3 Italian women. That means me as an ethnography. And 2 other friends. At the beginning, they were only colleagues in Saudi Arabia, but then after 30 years, we met for it was a coincidence that made us meet again, and we began talking and starting writing with 6 hands, and
Wow.
we wrote a book that about all the Muslim countries, beginning from Saudi Arabia, where we were working together in the 80s. And then we talked about not only Saudi Arabia, but also other countries. And now we are using, we became friends. They were not anthropologists. I have a background in anthropology and education. And they were only teachers that loved cultures, teachers in primary schools. So we wrote together, we made interviews, we found a lot of documentation, also visual documentation, and we made a book. I cannot say it's an academic book. It's a book for public. So, and we became friends. Now we are friends. So when you were speaking about friendship and collaborative work, I think we have to do this step, even if sometimes it seems very difficult for us. It's easier to write as anthropologists, but if we want to become a friend and use also, I don't like this term, but if we want to share our experience with other people, even if they are not anthropologists, we can do it. And we are now talking about this book and this experience to students in secondary schools, in municipalities. We are presenting it in many towns to everybody, and at any age, they without also background in anthropology, but they understand us and they ask questions and they are very happy. So I think your experience is great, but and you can continue and not to be afraid to use also a normal language, but with a normal language that everybody can understand, then you can speak about anthropology. And because when they ask you about questions about stereotypes, difficulties of Leyla and so on, you have the occasion to speak about anthropology in a very simple way to everybody. This is my point of view and my experience. So.
Oh, thank you. That's so inspiring. Yeah, I hope I will continue. Is your book available, or is it in Italian, or?
It's in Italian. It's only in Italian. We hope we could translate it into English, but I think we have a lot to do now in Italy, in Italian, but we are also presenting it in the network. We are trying to presenting it in the network of Italian abroad, or to people abroad that now they can speak, they know Italian. So it's a little difficult for me because I'm Italian, my English is not perfect, but I think you can reach a big audience, even if it's not not yet in English.
Yeah, well, that's one of the reasons to help her is so that it would be published in Turkish and in her language and to her public and also to my public, because I also live in Turkey. So I think it's very valuable to try to publish in languages besides English. So I definitely think it's great that you did it in Italian, but
it's a problem when, of course, you are American. I have understood you are from America, and Leyla is Turkish.
Yeah.
I know English enough. I can understand. It's not perfect, but if I would write, it's a big issue. The translations and the way the language in which you write, but I've never been. I can't be perfect in English and express my soul and the emotions and so on as I do in Italian. That's why also Leyla, of course, has to write in Turkish, and someone will translate afterwards in. There is a big work also in Italy. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs is trying to improve translations because, of course, in any language you have a lot to tell everybody, and also the work of translation is very important.
Yeah,
but I appreciated a lot of your presentation. I think it's a great work. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
David, and the RAI.
Well, thank you, Giovanna. It's always so nice that you can join us. There's a related question from David Clark. Would you like to be highlighted? I don't know, Hanine, if you could highlight David Clark.
So yeah, David, you would have to. Oh, did you have your hand up? Please put your hand up if you. Yeah, wonderful. Then I will allow you to speak. Okay. So you should be able to unmute.
Unmute, right.
Yeah.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, good. Well, I come from two different perspectives really here, as well as being an anthropologist by training, but I also belong to an autobiography study group of the British Sociological Association.
Oh.
And so I've become more interested in the process of writing autobiography and the extent to which it is a collaborative process in many cases. Either by using a ghostwriter or an interview format, but often also involving an editor or a translator in some cases. And I'm also part of Exile Writers Group in the UK, Exile Writers Inc. And so I'm used to hearing and reading other people's poetry in their own language and in translation. And the process of commenting on each other's work, as it were. So I'm attuned to the difficulties and challenges of such work. But what I'm suggesting really is you don't have to be the sole collaborator in this process. And you could involve other people in it who may be more skilled or fluent in writing in Turkish. And also, I think, as my Italian colleague mentioned, really is you don't have to aim for an academic audience, and So it's a different kind of writing, really, that you're trying to do in a memoir autobiography, and needs a different kind of approach. Which involves trying to make the writing more accessible to an ordinary audience, ordinary or general audience, rather than to an academic audience. Well,
yeah. Yeah, so it's both the issue of the translation, so maybe getting another person who was native in her language would be one thing, but also, yeah, doing a different kind of writing. I think that's such an interesting question, you know, to what extent anthropologists can be writing for the public and how we can make our writing more accessible, or how that can be valued in academia, or, you know, as well as how we can, one question I have is how I can teach her how to write autobiography. So how I can help her to access certain kinds of things that she might want to express. But maybe I could also bring in a fourth collaborator who was an expert in training people to write autobiographies, because that's also a whole field, as you mentioned. It's also a network.
Yes.
So maybe it's just a matter of sort of finding the expertise that makes the collaboration fruitful.
Indeed.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Yes, I mean, I myself have come across a very interesting book, which is a description by the site guard in a large archaeological excavation. And he published his own, he wrote a memoir. It must be about 30,000 words of what it was like to work with all these foreigners from his perspective. And it was very successful. He wrote it in Turkish very fluently, but he hadn't been taught any grammar. And so he wrote it without any punctuation at all. It's quite extraordinary. So 30,000 words with no punctuation. But, you know, a very, very bright man. And it's published in English. From memory, is it the West Coast Press? Anyway, it's very easy to find if you just look up memoirs of a guard at Çatalhöyük, or memoirs of a Çatalhöyük guard, something like that. And you'll see it's very illuminating. And the whole question of the relationship between those people who are kind enough to help us and the researcher is such an important one. And what I'm increasingly becoming aware of is the methodological implications as well, because if one is doing some kind of micro study, one often needs some degree of consent from a huge proportion of the community. Let's just say, for example, we were doing a study in medical anthropology, which was looking at the incidence of people who fall ill because of polluted water, which of course is a very, very important kind of study, which happens all the time. But you couldn't do that with only one interlocutor. You need to have some kind of permission from everybody. So you're looking at an entirely different kind of methodology then. You're looking at something where you've really got to have a systematic understanding of who's there. You've got to have some kind of database. You've got to have some kind of access to everybody in the community, which can be extremely difficult and exhausting and time consuming. And then all sorts of protocols developed in order to answer that type of inquiry. But then you've got the exact opposite of which yours is a fine example, where what we're really doing is developing contacts with just one or two or three people and using them as an insight into the community. And it is a completely different kind of methodology. Here, we don't need a database. We don't really need any type of apparatus at all. We could almost do it without notes, because if you're talking every day to somebody for 3 years, you internalize an awful lot of what they're saying, and you can just sit down and write it all out. So we within a single discourse of social anthropology, we can actually go between two absolutely radically opposed methodologies. I don't know whether this contrast ever struck you during the course of your work.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think it's amazing. I mean, this is the beauty of anthropology, and you know, it's also the complexity, and we really want to ask these questions. You know, there's not a one size fits all for our research, and the questions about ethics and consent and how to design research are very complex and ongoing, and I think interesting and important. So I think it's great that anthropologists are wanting and willing to explore these topics. And I like both. I actually, even though I, you know, with Leyla did this very, you know, we have this long relationship over, you know, more than 9 years. With the research that I did with Syrians was part of an EU project with, you know, 11 partners in different countries throughout Europe, and we were comparing migrants in different places from different places to different places, and I think that brought so many great insights too. So I'm in favor of both. I'm not advocating for only this type of research, but I think we could think more about this type of research in terms of its potential ethical questions or methodological questions.
Sure. I mean, would you be happy with would you be happy working with a team of 6 or 10 people? I mean, how would you do that?
To do this type of project, yeah. I will say that I've had very I don't know about a team of 6 or 10. Maybe I'm open to it. You know, 6 or 10 people who want to try. I've had wonderful experiences co-authoring where me and other researchers have done research with different members of communities, and then we sort of both write about the experiences together. So I think it is possible to find connections across different people and among different researchers. It's not the type of thing that's incomparable in that way, and that's also part of why I'm trying to think about this in terms of Syrians. Like, to what extent is, you know, Leyla has a very specific story, and the German-Turkish migration experience is very specific, and the return migration experience, and to what extent is it really unique, or can we think about ways that there are sort of ethical questions about education, gender, and Islam that are also true for Syrian migrants, or how migration changes people's choices that are also true for Syrian migrants. So I do want to see if other people, like, I'm very much interested in seeing if other people are finding the same things in their own context. But I guess, yeah, there is a question, what if we're talking about 6 to 10 books about somebody's, you know, it's a lot of detail and contextual complexity that needs to be, you know, brought together, but I'm willing.
Exactly. I mean, what's behind my question, of course, is the extent to which what we do can be shared in a way which is independent of ourselves as the observer.
Yeah.
Because in order to work with 6 people, to some extent, one needs to sublimate one's own ego and say, look, I will exteriorize these things that I'm interested in, and I will try and create some level of shared discourse, rather than only talk about, you know, for example, my own response to the situation. So it leads to a slightly different approach in the way that we actually create our research.
Definitely.
But not necessarily a bad one, of course. You say you'll be interested to hear from anybody about the experience. Well, certainly, the common thread, or one great common thread, is how deeply unsettling it is for anybody to live in 2 countries at the same time, or to have deep experience of 2 countries. The refrain is, in all the research I've done in this area, that they don't know whether they are Turkish or German now, or rather, they don't know whether their homeland is in Germany or their homeland is in Turkey, leaving out the national side of it. Because when they're in Turkey, they miss Germany, and vice versa. I mean, it's profoundly unsettling for them. That seems to be something that resonates with the people you've spoken with as well.
Yeah, it continues even when, after they return. I mean, yeah,
Yeah,
it's not
that's the
only
point,
the
yeah.
experience for the migrant, but then they realize, in a way, you can, I think through return migration, you can see how much migration changes people even more than you can in the other country, because then you see what they have taken with them and how they interact with people in the return context. So
yeah, and their home countries have changed, their friends have changed.
yeah.
So in a way, I suppose you could almost say that we are our experiences. Yeah, it is very, very difficult to recombine it at different times. But there we are. Let's carry on with our colleagues. I've had to cross-calibrate a little bit because I had to restart my Zoom after it froze. But there are two questions from Sriracha Mehta. So thank you for them, which are rather different questions. The two questions are, just as it were to alert you, is the first one is about bread. It says, what are the differences between Turkish bread and Syrian bread? Related, and also, what resources do refugees create for themselves in order to create a space of safe identity? And also, could you please speak to the issue of cultural capital and ways that migrants could access the same? So that's three kind of linked questions. But also, Sriracha, if you're there, please do also come live, and then you can discuss these points with the speaker yourself. So Hani will try and sort that out whilst our speaker begins to answer your question. So please go ahead.
Okay. Well, these are all interesting and interrelated questions in different ways. I think access to bread, or ways of understanding bread, can be a way of understanding safety and cultural capital. So people in Turkey and Syria eat bread with almost every meal, probably with many people with every meal. So it's the one thing that you always have, and the price of bread, the type of bread, where you buy the bread, access to fresh bread has a lot of symbolic value for both cultures. So the typical bread in the cities of Istanbul is kind of like a loaf of a light white bread. It has like a crusty exterior and a kind of soft interior. The Syrian bread is more like what Turks call pita, or what we would also call pita in the US, I guess, is more of a thin kind of bread. But you can also find this bread in Turkey, especially in southern Turkey, in certain places where they make kebab. So, the question is that Syrian bread the same as those types of Turkish bread, or is it better? When do they eat Turkish bread or Syrian bread? I think it has a lot of questions about creating a sense of a safe identity. So bread is, in my experience with Syrian migrants, it's one of the things that they often will look for. So getting Syrian bread from a Syrian store is something that they really want. They are not satisfied with the Turkish bread, or with the even with the Turkish bread that's similar to Syrian bread. But I did have a colleague who did research in Hatay, which is the southern city that's right on the border with Syria. And she said that in that place, when Syrians first came, Turkish people were very happy that Syrians were bringing their bread, and said that this is actually how our bread should be. Their bread is delicious, and this is the true Arab bread that we've always wanted, that we've tried to create here. But I think in cities like Istanbul, it's more stigmatized, as in the example I gave of the kid who told his family that he didn't want to bring, or I don't know if I talked about this in detail, but he told his parents that he didn't want to bring Syrian bread to school anymore because the kids were making fun of him. So in terms of cultural capital, yeah, that's a really complex topic, in the sense that like everything in culture, it's going to be debated. What is the source of cultural capital? Basically refers to a kind of prestige or status that you get from knowing what to do, how to do, having the right thing, saying the right thing, eating the right thing, acting the right way. So it's a theory from Bourdieu, but has been sort of developed in a lot of different ways and cases. And I think Syrians or migrants in general have to decide if they're going to value or pursue the cultural capital of the country that they've come into, and to what extent that might be the same as their own culture or country, or to what extent there might be different ways of getting cultural capital, and that can change in different contexts and different groups. So how do they sort of negotiate what they want to see as cultural capital? And I mean, I could give so many examples. One example is speaking Arabic or speaking Turkish. So whether people can speak Turkish without an accent or pass as Turkish versus whether they speak Arabic and with also even within that language with what kind of accent. So there's sort of ways that people try to signal the group that they're a part of. And for example, Turkmen, we know we've done some research with some Turkmen Syrians who speak Turkish, but they're Syrian and or Syrian nationals. And so they will try to pass as Turkish and not speak Arabic. But then there's sort of debates about, like, why are you not speaking Arabic? Are you ashamed of Arabic? And why are you trying to pass as Turkish? They don't accept you as Turkish, they see you as Syrian. So the question of cultural capital is a really complicated one, like where capital in which group, in which context. And yeah, it's something you can try to learn, maybe, ways of performing the type of capital that's wanted in the society, or what they might think would be wanted, but not always being able to. Religion could be another good example. So doing certain religious practices, reading the Quran in Arabic is something that a lot of Syrians talked about was perceived as important for Turkish ways of making connections with Turkish communities, with religious Turkish communities. And they were initially welcomed to Turkey as religious brothers, as fellow Muslims. So being Muslim, or sort of, that could be a field of cultural capital for migrants too. So many things. So yeah, like the food, the language, religion, so many different areas can become a kind of way that people try to show their value, and which is a form of belonging, I would argue too. So yeah.
That's really interesting. So on that question, how are the Syrians gradually integrating? Because one of the fascinating things about Turkey is how marvelously Turks from outside Turkey have integrated. I'm thinking of the Balkan Turks and the Turks from the former Russian Empire and so on, from all sorts of different backgrounds. And yet there always has been a stronger sense of almost cultural discomfort when it comes to the Turkish image of the Arabic lands, in a way that they don't have with their co-religionists from other parts. And I'm wondering whether that causes specific difficulties when it comes to the as it were, the success or otherwise of the lives that the Syrians are able to forge for themselves in Turkey. So how would you assess that at the moment?
I think it's a very, very, very difficult for them. Yeah, it's definitely. I mean, it's as you said. On the one hand, Turkey is incredibly diverse and has been a site of migrations of different groups for, thousands of years. So there have been Greeks, Jews, Christians of different, all different, many people from many different religions, people coming from the Caucasus, from Central Asia, from the Middle East, not only to and from Europe. So there's been a lot of movement through Turkey. there's a lot of diversity in Turkey. There's people who are Kurdish, there's people who are Alevi, there's, you know, people of, you know, all different backgrounds in Turkey. But I think, I guess maybe I would say a couple things. One is there has, in the last few years, there's been a lot of pressure. I mean, economic pressure is like, there's a serious problem with inflation. The economy is really bad. So this is kind of creating tensions in society. There's other kinds of political challenges and, you know, that are sort of making people feel like they are not free to express themselves and their ways of life as they wish. So they are sort of looking for different groups to blame. So when Syrians first came in, you know, 2011, in small numbers, they were welcomed, and you know, to some extent they still are, and they were treated as guests who will be here temporarily, but we can help them, and soon the war will be over, was the thought. But as time has gone on, also the numbers are but high in some ways. I mean, they're not actually, you know, if they're not a large percentage of Turkish cities or something, actually, but Turkey is hosting more refugees than any other country. And so people have concerns, you know, how is this affecting the economy? How is this affecting crime? How is this affecting services? So I think it's a little bit of, you know, the just anxieties in society are placed onto migrants. It's a little bit like there are a lot of migrants, and there is a concern about how they will be incorporated or how they should be incorporated. Should they continue to speak Arabic? Should that be used on street signs, for example, has been not street signs, but even businesses, whether they should be able to advertise in Arabic has been a kind of concern for Turks. What about what will happen with Turkish language, Turkish culture? Will they bring different values? So there is some concern, but I think we have to just also realize that there's some kind of racism or just fear and lack of acceptance of Arabs in Turkey. They are always, people are not willing or don't want to be seen as Arab themselves. So there's a kind of idea that a lot of negative ideas about Arabs, and so Syrians face this, you know, like they are seen as first Arab as opposed to Muslim or just humans. Things are really, really bad now, I have to say. Unfortunately, the last few years, it's really seems like there's more intolerance, there's more and more, the dominant discourse, all the political parties, you know, surveys say 80% of Turks say they want Syrians to go home. So it's really.
Yeah, and the process of, well, there are two things going on now. Some presumably are going back, or even doing both. They're going back and coming back again, as it were. They're leading a transnational life, but other ones are getting passports, I think. I don't know what your sense is of the proportion of Syrian refugees who have been awarded Turkish national citizenship.
I think, I mean, they haven't, that's one of the, I mean, one thing that's a little bit, you know, I think creates anxiety for people is that the government has not published official numbers, but it's a couple 100,000 is what I think most academics think. And they haven't exactly been open about how or to whom they give the citizenship. So they say that it's based on, you know, education or, you know, economic situation. So this actually makes people feel, you know, concerned, like it's not clear who is becoming a citizen under what conditions and how is it being chosen. So I don't think that the numbers are so high that they will create a, you know, that they have a kind of like influence on elections, or, you know, that they're a voting bloc, but it's a source of anxiety for people. like, you know, you know, the sense of what are the duties and rights of citizens in terms of military service, in terms of civic obligation, and how are they being incorporated. I think it would be good if there was more openness from the state side.
Yeah, well, that's yeah, indeed, as you say, a really crucial issue. But another colleague would like to ask their question live. Would you like to go ahead? You're down on the list here is Leyla Sa. But please go ahead and ask your question live.
Yeah, Sahara, you should be able to unmute now. We can't hear you yet, but I can see that you're not muted anymore. Maybe
Is there a technical problem? If there's a technical problem, then please feel free to put your question in the Q&A. That's no problem at all. No, we can't hear, I'm afraid. But whilst we're thinking about that, David Clark would like to make another point. So why don't you spotlight David Clark, Haneen, and we can. Here's a very interesting point about identity in the second generation migrants. So please go ahead, David.
Right. So not much has been written really about the next generations down from the migrants. Often migrants are still feeling a sense of belonging to both countries where they came from and the host country. But this also creates some confusion about where the children or grandchildren belong, to which country or where. And so another hat I'm wearing is from a second generation of refugees and survivors from Nazi Germany. And so both my parents came from Berlin and never quite settled down in this country or quite knew where they belonged. So I've co-edited a book recently on second and third generation going back to where their parents or grandparents came from in order to kind of find out more about their family background. So I don't know if this resonates with some of the people that you interviewed and spoke to.
Oh, it does so much. I mean, first of all, in the book, I talk a lot about Leyla's children, and she has 5 children, and how she interacts with them in different ways, and sometimes talking about how, you know, complaining about the double standard for boy children versus girl children in Turkey, but then other times talking about the importance of her daughter to do this thing that would be perceived as what society thinks is the right thing to do. So we see her making sort of different choices and how her children, it's definitely affecting her parenting. And I think she thinks of it as often affecting her parenting. And it's a big source of her concern about the decisions that she makes. And I can just imagine what her children are thinking. And I think it would be fascinating to research them. I also know that there is some interesting research, I forget what it's called, but there's a term for communities of former migrants. Like, for example, if a region of a country has a historical relationship to migration, and now there are 3rd or 4th generations living in that place, so they are the descendants of migrants. So the extent to which their sense of belonging or their migrant identity makes them have certain politics, or when the question of new migrants come in, how do they relate to that, even though they themselves haven't experienced migration, but they have a certain identity as being a migrant or being a foreigner in that place, or having a kind of conditional belonging. So I think being a descendant of a migrant, I think you're right that it is also under researched, and I would like to see more research on that too, for sure. I think that's very interesting.
Yes. What's your sense, David, about the second generation of the people you've been researching? Do they have problems, or are they normally able to find some kind of synthesis?
Well, yes, it's so mostly there were. I have 20 different authors submitting a chapter each on their experience, both of growing up mainly in this country, two from New Zealand and one from Israel, and I think one growing up in Canada. So, and one growing up in the States. So there are different experiences, and growing up, going to schools in their house, well, in the country that they were actually born in, but feeling confused about where their true identity lies, and particularly when the parent or grandparent dies, then trying to find out more about their lives before they migrated, and what it all meant to them. And so a search for finding out more about family history is important in that process. And going back to where they came from made a big impression on them in terms of reconnecting with a past that they never really knew about, or not too much about.
Yeah. Of course, with the Jewish one, it's both the religion and the nationality one, isn't it? And certainly, I've known people from the refugee community in Britain going, for example, converting to Anglicanism, but still visiting Germany, simply because that was where they were brought up, and so they want to experience that culture sometimes, which causes another layer of complexity. Yeah, well, thank you very much. Let's bring in Leyla's question now. Sorry if I've pronounced your name incorrectly. It's just the way it appears on your name in the screen there. And she would like to ask whether transnational migrants also face belonging or identity issues. And she asked specifically, a really important point, I think, is how does Turkish diaspora governance play a role in both returnee and transnational migrants' belonging? And by diaspora governance, I assume what we mean there is the Turkish government, not, as it were, neglecting their citizens in Germany. Maybe I've misunderstood, but certainly that must be one aspect of the question. What do you think?
Yeah, Sahira, I guess you still can't talk, right? We still can't hear you, so I'll just respond based on the as David talked about your question. So when you're asking if Turkish transnational migrants also face the belonging identity issue, yeah, I think this is, in a way, this is kind of what David Clark was talking about. We have fourth generation of Turkish migrants to Germany, and so they can pass as German in some cases, or speak perfect German. Maybe they have achieved some educational success, and so to what extent do they feel a belonging in Germany or Turkey? To what extent do they know about it or feel some kind of in-betweenness? I think is a really really interesting issue, and there's a lot of research about this. Actually, there has been there's a lot written about Turks in Germany and this question and the different identities. So I could recommend some good readings and books on that issue. I think Turkish diaspora governance is really important. So I'm thinking of the case of, for example, the Turkish president going to Germany and saying that Turks in Germany should continue to speak Turkish, and the Turkish government provides imams for mosques and encourages citizens to vote. And there's a question of how much the vote of Turkish Germans affects politics in Turkey. There's also Turkish Germans giving money to certain social movements or political leaders in Turkey. So yeah, it's a huge, it plays a huge role, and it's definitely something that it would be, there are also some interesting studies about it. But I would say, yeah, especially for the migrants in Germany, the diaspora governance plays a huge role, but also for the returnees who are sort of looking at what role German Turks are playing in Turkish society and sort of taking their cue from that about how they should feel about their position or their background. So, yes.
Yeah, and of course, how does that get shaped within the religious discourse? Because clearly that is very much part of it, in the Turkish government wanting to send out imams to Turkey. Could you sort of draw a bit more of the relationship between perhaps her ethical dilemmas and religion? Does she have an ethical understanding independently of religion, for example?
I think so. I don't see that as an encompassing, I mean, she could, like, for example, if I take the topic of education, she could definitely talk about the importance for Muslims to be educated or to understand the Quran in Turkish as well as Arabic, or she is definitely sees education as part of the religious project, but I think she doesn't see everything through that lens, at least as I interpret it. She definitely sees a kind of non-religious education as really valuable, or I look at it as a kind of self-education that is important to her, like a kind of a cultivating a way of responding to situations based on an idea of what is the, I don't know if the word would be sort of scientific, but like a sort of a, I don't know, an educated, a way of taking in a certain amount of information and analyzing it in such a way to determine what is the right action, as opposed to, which in that sense, it's not coming from what is written in the Quran or the Hadith, or just what religious teachers would say. So she has, she definitely, I don't think that religion is her main source, but it could be for other people. I mean, there's an interesting book about Turks in Germany, which looks at 4 different kind of religious paths. I think it looks at 4 different religious groups in Germany. So Turks who are more involved in mainstream mosques, the different kinds of religious leaders that people get involved with, different types of political Islamic movements in Germany. So I think that is, yes, could be a very important source of ethical meaning for people, but I wouldn't say that it's her sole source.
What's the author and the title of the book, in case our colleagues are interested in looking it up?
No, let me look for a second. I know that he was a student of Jenny White's, and
Well, don't worry if we can always circulate it. Yeah, people later, because we have got just 5 minutes left and 2 more questions.
Okay.
And so the first question is whether you can say anything about the transnational entrepreneurial activities of Turkish migrants, and this fluidity of modern borders. And the second question, just so you can time yourself, is Siraj is asking whether is there any way that Syrians can overcome their second-class status and actually integrate successfully in your experience? So there we are. Two questions for you.
Oh, okay. I mean, I don't know that much about the transnational entrepreneurial activities of Turkish migrants in the UK, but I know that there is a big exodus from Turkey and brain drain because of the economic situation. So I wouldn't be surprised if there are more and more people, Turkish people, looking to migrate to different parts of Europe and starting different kinds of transnational activities, but I don't know specifically about the UK case, but that would be interesting. I'm glad you're researching that. If Syrians can overcome their second-class status and integrate into mainstream Turkish society, I would say to some extent integration is a question of time, or any immigrant group over time can in some different ways become part of society. And certainly as the generations continue and the children are educated in that country and speak the language fluently, and we can also question what integration means. Is it mean that you adopt all the aspects of the culture, or does it mean that you are accepted by other people in the culture, or is it possible to have a multicultural society where multiple cultures are accepted? So there's kind of a question of what that would really mean for Syrians or for any immigrant group. Right now, I guess it's a question of passing. So I would say that Turkmen Syrians are in some ways trying to pass as Turks, speaking Turkish, adopting whatever Turkish habits they can. There's a different way of wearing headscarves between Syrian and Turkish women, for example. So if they wear the headscarf in the Syrian style, they can be seen as a Syrian woman on the street. If not, they can pass. So right now it seems to be passing is sort of the basis for integrating in that sense. But we could also reimagine integration as a way of having a variety of cultures that are valued and exchanged, and having people dressing differently, speaking different languages, doing different things could also be seen as part of Turkish society, or being a part of Turkey. But right now that's not the case. So there's a kind of question of how to bring about, that's a question I have, is how to bring about a way of thinking about how Syrians can belong in Turkey. How what are the stakes that what's required from the Turkish side, and what would be required of them to be considered part of it, and equal members, and how can people come together around their shared problems as opposed to blaming one group or the other, is something that I guess we'll see in the future. So I hope the answer is yes, that there is a manner that Syrians can overcome their second-class status. Let's
yeah, let's hope so. Let's hope so. I see that our time is up, so thank you very much for introducing us to this absolutely fascinating world, and obviously we wish you all success in your forthcoming projects and with this book. And just to remind listeners and colleagues that the book is available half price from this seminar if you follow the link which Hanine kindly put up, which means that it's a very, very good chance to get it. So I shall turn over to Haneen to close the session down for us today, and thank you very much indeed.
Thank you everybody for coming. Thank you, David, for hosting, and thank you everyone for inviting me to the RAI. These were also, thank you for these great questions.
Yeah,
And
I would like to say all the questions and comments will be shared with Susan afterwards, so she will be able to read what's happening in the chat.
I'll be happy to get in touch with anyone if anyone would like to talk more or is interested in similar things, similar issues. I'll be really happy to talk with any of you more or to collaborate in the future. So don't hesitate to get in touch. Thank you.
Yeah, I've put your email in the chat as well for people if they want to reach you. All right, thank you everybody for coming. Thank you to the participants and thank you to you, Susan. That was really a lovely presentation.
Thank you.
So
thank you.
have a lovely afternoon.